Did ancient Egyptians have blonde hair? Well, in order to understand this, we have to cut it down so that the topic isn't so large. First of all, we have to start with hair dyes, which we know were implemented by ancient Egyptians on mummies, which explains a lot of the hair colors. But secondly, we have to look at mummies that predate the hair dye period, so called hair dye period. And thirdly, we have to look at why is it that blonde hair is barely represented in ancient Egypt, and when it is, it's represented with people dyeing their hair. First, we have to establish something. There's two main sources for blonde hair that we see in the modern world. One is from Polynesia, and the other one, and Melanesia, the Oceanias region, and the other one is from Europe, with the Indo-European spread, which sent the blonde hair far and wide. This visible blonde hair is actually one of the most studied forms of hair around the world, probably because of its modern desirability. Something about it that's actually challenging is finding out when it spread around the world. But we know that it spread with the Indo-Europeans, a group that was basically unfamiliar with Africa until very recently, as there was another group of people making the move. These were the Afro-Asiatics, as they're called. These Afro-Asiatics met in the middle, somewhere in the Middle East, and their groups and their languages were shared with each other. We see Indo-European borrowed words in Sumerian and Afro-Asiatic words borrowed from Sumerian as well. So this must mean that they met, but nowhere near Egypt. So where would Egypt get this blonde hair from? That's my first argument. It seems that it's wishful thinking to imagine that this blonde hair that you see as far back as the earliest mummies would be blonde hair inherited from Europeans. Besides the blonde hair, we see red hair, and this red hair as well, they accuse of being European. But as you can see with the hair, firstly, it's not as realistic as a normal human being, but also you see that it has this sort of rusty look about it, like it's rust, and I will explain that very soon. But like I said, we have to go stage by stage.
Hi, it's Mike Chen. What we're gonna be talking about in this video is what some people may consider a controversial subject, as with most videos on this channel, but also one worthy of study. And before we start, I'm gonna raise this question to everybody. Do we really know, genetically speaking, where ancient Egyptians came from? And the answer is, we have our theories, but not really. We also don't know what exactly they look like. When we try to imagine what ancient Egyptians may have looked like, some of us immediately picture a civilization populated by citizens with dark skin and dark hair, but was that truly the case? At the time when graves of mummies were discovered more than 100 years ago, a general expectation was that the early Egyptians were of Negroid origin. But in our enlightened and technologically advanced era, where we possess greatly enhanced capabilities in forensic science, certain mind-blowing archaeological discoveries and evidences have emerged that are not exactly supportive of the seemingly universal known fact that dynastic Egyptians were exclusively of African origin. All shades of hair were found around the time of ancient Egypt's civilization, from brown to blonde and even auburn and red. Today, these hair colors are found among the people of North Europe and North Africa and are indicative of Caucasian origins. So,
from the Natural History Museum, we read, a mummy from around 1000 BCE unearthed in Thebes, Deir el-Bahri, an ancient Egyptian temple complex and archaeological site. The female has reddish hair, which has been dyed with henna. The henna plant transcending time, religion, and culture. Now, again, like I said, there's something called henna that was used to dye the hair. This video simplifies things and makes it sound like random people just had red hair in spite of the fact that he's already proven that this hair was not that represented in those wall art of the ancient Egyptians. But let's carry on.
Does this mean that there were fair-skinned, blonde, or red-headed ancient Egyptians prior and during Egypt's dynastic period? There is a theory suggesting that prior to 2000 BC, Egyptians were of Caucasoid European ethnicity. This is supported by the physical anthropology of the oldest mummies that have ever been found, the busts and statues of several pharaohs and their wives.
This is simply incorrect, but we're not here to talk about that, so I'll just leave these 3 statues as evidence.
Colored wall paintings discovered, and the descriptions provided in historical accounts. As early as 5000 BC, the majority of the Caucasoid European occupants of Egypt were believed to have begun abandoning the increasingly warm country and headed to the cooler climates of Europe.
I just want to state that there's no evidence for anything he just said. There is no Egyptians who lived in hot climates and then they moved to Europe. Secondly, I don't even know how you would prove that they moved to Europe 5,000 years ago. If, first of all, how would you even prove that those people are specifically from Egypt? How would you know that they didn't come from other parts of Africa? And then thirdly, what is this? This is like the most, let's say, not well researched video I've seen in a long time. The idea that Egyptians got tired in 5000 BC and then went to Europe. Let's start with the fact that 5000 BC, Egypt wasn't exactly what it is today, or what it became during the 3000s BC. And then secondly, they migrate, like when, on what planet?
Then after about 1500 BC, the population in the area became increasingly mixed, with the Nubians from the south of Egypt, which explains the typical physical appearance and genetic makeup of modern-day Egyptians. This
I actually have no idea where he's getting most of his information from. I'm actually completely confused.
theory strongly refutes the ideas of Afrocentrism, with the
Ding, 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 we have a winner. It's a way of refuting Afrocentrism, using any information possible that could possibly shove the Black African Egyptian theory away. And to be honest, this is probably one of the worst ones I've seen, especially given that almost everything he said is not supported by anyone anywhere on this earth. But I hope he's going to clean it up in his next version. I'm still trying to get to the hair part.
presentation of several archaeological, anthropological, and forensic evidences, 3 of which I am about to discuss with you now. One of the most famous cases of mummies of ancient Egypt that had red or blonde hair is one of the Ghibeline pre-dynastic mummies, which is housed in the British Museum. Commonly referred to by curators in the public as Ginger, this ancestor from ancient Egypt died more than 5,000 years ago in the late pre-dynastic period, around 3400 BC or earlier. His mummified body was found in a cemetery at Ghibeline, Egypt, with his toes and fingernails perfectly preserved. He was given the nickname of Ginger because of his golden curly hair, which interestingly looks similar to the curly locks often seen on Greek and Roman sculptures. And although his body is stained from buried in the sand for more than 5,000 years, this Egyptian ancestor looked like he once had yellowish white skin.
So this is what I wanted to get at. And of course, this mummy is used because they say that the mummification process was not being used back then, and therefore red henna was not applied to the person's hair. I will start with something that's very, very obvious. Red hair in Africa and the application of that is as old as hell. Maybe it wasn't applied to him while he was dead, but it could have been applied to him when he was alive. But we don't even need this. We don't even need this. Let's pretend that that excuse does not even exist. Let's use something else. The desert. This guy was buried in the desert, and you could see with his body that it's stained. And the funny part is he says that he's like, oh, it's stained, but that doesn't matter because you can tell that this person is probably a European. It's like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Let's talk about the curliness of the hair that he says is similar to the Greeks. Now, I'll tell you why. First of all, what he's saying doesn't make any sense because there's so many other people who are of this region who have curly hair that it's silly. As you can see on screen, I have my Hepari, and as you can see, he's Nubian, or at least is said to be Nubian because he's got extremely dark skin and his hair of the mummy is curly. But you can see in the hair that it's unraveling in the same way that that red-haired mummy is got like small curls. And the funny part is this unraveling of the hair, not even locks, just unraveling of curly African hair is something that's been documented multiple times in the decay of man. If you don't know about science, things go from order to disorder. The order of human hair in Africa is going to unravel if you don't have any means to hold it in that certain shape. This is why the bigger your hair gets, the more it starts to form its own shape. This is why you have to take care of your hair. But at the same time, we don't even need this as well. The curliness, again, is obvious. It's black African hair that's been unraveled. But we don't need this as well, as I will show you something else.
Another example of uncovered red-haired mummies from ancient Egypt are the ones found among thousands of other mummies by a group of archaeologists in the Fagol Gamis graveyard in the south of Cairo. Archaeologists from Brigham Young University in Utah have been excavating that cemetery for about 30 years, and they have established that many of the mummies they have found dates back to 30 BC, which is around the time when the Roman or Byzantine Empire ruled Egypt. Researchers reached the conclusion that there were more than 1 million bodies within the cemetery, and it was revealed that the cemetery was not intended for royalty but for the common people. There were many interesting discoveries that were uncovered in the excavation of this ancient cemetery in the analysis of the mummies found buried in the area. And one of them is the observation that the mummies appear to be clustered together according to their hair color. They found blonde-haired mummies in one area, while another area was filled with red-haired ones. This led to the overall impression that the clusters of mummies buried by hair color in the graveyard could be indicative that these people once belonged in the same family groups and therefore were related with each other. This
is actually outstanding. It's like, first of all, the Romans didn't have blonde hair in mass and they didn't have red hair in mass, and we know this is a fact. So this cannot be evidence of red hair or blonde hair. This is evidence of dyeing the hair. And this is my second argument that I'll put in, that even until this close to our time, you see dyeing of hair. This separation of, oh, somewhere put there, somewhere put there, and I'm just believing him when he says that. I don't know if it's true. That would be proof that they were purposefully dyeing people different colors and then putting them in different sections, since the Greeks and the Romans did not have any blondes. Well, they didn't have blondes in mass and they didn't have redheads in mass, at least not enough to have millions of people to be represented in this way.
Speaks volumes of the possibility that a small but significant part of ancient Egypt's population were red-haired or blonde-haired individuals. The last case of red-haired Egyptian mummies we will be discussing is the preserved body of Ramesses II, who is arguably the most famous of all the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Ramesses II ruled as a pharaoh of the 19th dynasty.
Okay, pause. We can see his beard. His beard is black. His skin, too, appears to be very brown. Nothing about this man in his picture appears to be Caucasoid at all. For him to actually make this assumption, again, is astounding. It's almost crippling to hear, because it's like, where is he getting this from? What books is he reading?
Between 1279 to 1213 BC. It is believed to be the one who reigned when the children of Israel were liberated through the prophet Moses. In 1975, the Egyptian government tasked French scientists to attempt the preservation of Ramses' mummy. This opened an opportunity for researchers to determine his age, body condition, health, diet, and even his racial affinities. There were those who were of the opinion that Ramses II was black. However, according to the study conducted by Professor P.F. Scaldi and his research team, microscopic examination examinations of the pharaoh's hair roots showed that his hair had natural red pigments, which meant that in his younger years, Ramses II was a redhead. Moreover, it was also determined that Ramses had wavy hair, and a combination of these features meant that the pharaoh was fair-skinned. While there have been enough evidence for some experts to conclude that some ancient Egyptians were blonde or red-haired, there are still many researchers who believe that there were no ancient Egyptians whose natural hair weren't dark brown or black. Some of these skeptics argue that mummies found with light-colored strands of hair can be explained by the effects of the mummification process itself. And so, to find a definitive answer to this intriguing question about the effects of the mummification process on human hair, Dr. Jeanette Davey from the Victoria Institute of Forensic Medicine in Australia decided to conduct experiments on 16 hair samples from men and women aged between 4 and 92 years old. Most of the hair samples were dark colored, but for comparison, one of the sample strands was gray while another one was fair. There was also one strand with henna on it. Davey and her colleague, retired industrial chemist Alan Elliott, also prepared some powder of synthetic natron for their experiment. Natron was a type of salt that was applied on the bodies during the process of mummification to dry them out. It has also been linked to the supposed change in hair color of the human remains. Davey and Elliott covered the hair samples in synthetic natron for 40 days, the same amount of time believed to be required back in ancient times to dry out the human body. When the 40-day period had passed, the samples were removed from the salty powder, and after undergoing microscopic analysis, it was determined that there was no change in the color of the hair samples at all.
Well, that's good enough evidence for me. You know what I mean? You take a little bit of natron for 40 days, put some salt around it, put some natron around it, just bury them for 40 days, relax, come back. Oh my God, they haven't changed. This is proof. 7,000 years in the desert, not 5,000 years in the desert versus 40 days of salt. Come on, come on. And then secondly, what? I don't understand what is going on here. What's this test supposed to prove? That people's hair color doesn't change? Again, I have something that's waiting for you guys that will blow any of this argument out of the water and will make it seem so silly. But let's let this guy finish what he has to say.
For Dr. Davey, the result of her experiment is convincing enough to say that fair-haired Egyptians did exist in ancient Egypt. It's just that finding fair-haired Egyptian mummies has so far been a very rare occurrence. Some ancient Egyptians could have been blue-eyed blondes or redheads, and while the country...
Now they have blue eyes, huh? None of these studies that he showed has anything to do with blue eyes, but all of a sudden he inserts blue eyes.
During those times was not as multicultural as several parts of the world are today. There were certainly a variety of racial mixes that made the existence of fair-skinned Egyptians possible. Now, is this discovery particularly earth-shattering? Well, it depends on which vantage point you are analyzing the evidence from. It remains a fact that a majority of Egyptians today are dark-haired and dark-skinned. These archaeological, anthropological, and forensic evidences merely attest to a not-so-implausible reality that at some point in its ancient history, there were a portion of people in Egypt who were red, were blonde-haired, and fair-skinned. I mean, in our modern world, individuals of different race and ethnicities encounter and mingle with each other like a natural habitat. So is it really that surprising that our ancestors did the same thousands of years ago? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I'll see you later.
Yes, it is very, very improbable. And like I said, I promised you guys some evidence that people's hair changes. And this idea that they don't change is ridiculous. But in order to answer this question, we will have to leave Egypt and find some other place where the excuse of Europeans cannot stand. The excuse that, oh, these people were just communicating with Europeans cannot stand. Will we go somewhere further south in Africa? No. To Europe? We could, but we won't. Asia? Maybe, but nah. Polynesia? No. Let's go to the Americas. A couple thousand years ago, there are a bunch of mummies from back then. Some of them have extremely dark hair, and we know that Americans have jet black hair for the most part. blonde hair and red hair virtually did not exist back then. So, are there mummies from America with red and blonde hair? Well, let us check. In the Incan Empire, they mummified people. And in this case that I'm talking about, they mummified 3 children. One of them has obvious jet black hair, and in fact, they look so similar to modern Native Americans that it's actually undeniable that they are related to these people. Another one of them also has jet black hair, but you can see that there's tinges of red on their hair, and they have the same rusting look. Their preservation is better than those of Egypt, but again, you might say maybe this isn't good enough, so let's get more. In Chile, there are multiple mummies with red hair, and like I said before, they have this rusty look to them, as if they're rusting. This is due to oxidization. And like you can see, we're talking about a population that had jet black hair, but because of extreme temperatures, not as extreme as Egypt, but extreme temperatures, the hair color has changed. And it's not the same as it would have been in life. Some of them preserve their pigment, but others have this reddish tinge to their hair. And of course, this reddish tinge is similar to the one we saw in Egypt. So, why is their hair changing then? If they are Europeans, why is their hair changing? Is the assumption now that these people are Europeans as well and that Europeans made it all the way to America and mummified people there? So, again, if we follow the evidence, you will see more and more evidence that hair just naturally changes color after you die. The nutrients in your hair or the melanin in your hair over time decays, especially if you're in a hot climate like Egypt, where it from the jump it's just pulling it away. Remember the guy said the reddish skin as well is due to them being of lighter skin. It is not true that the people of the Americas have lighter skin, except the ones who live in Canada or whatever. And I can show you here that this person has the same sort of color that the other person had. In fact, the other person was darker. Her hair as well is quite red. In fact, it's light red. And there's so many other mummies from the Americas that we can look at. I also want you to notice how most of the hair in the Americas, because it's straight, doesn't do that weird curly pattern thing that you see with the ones in Egypt. You notice in Egypt, the ones that were naturally mummified and some other ones, they had like this curly, roundy thing, spirally pattern thing. But if you look at the American ones, they seem to be outflowing how you'd expect straight hair to behave. If you notice this, you will realize that that is because the hair is outspreading. Like I showed you with that quote unquote Nubian guy that they put out there, his hair was already unraveling. But if you notice, these American ones are not unraveling, they remain straight. And of course, the red hair is just everywhere. Whatever conclusion you come to personally, that's fine. By the way, there are other mummies from other parts of the world that I could have used, but the reason I chose these ones is because the excuse of they were from Europe is completely disappeared. There are others from India and China which have reddish hair and yellowish hair, but they're going to use the excuse that it's Indo-Europeans or something to say that that's why they have reddish hair or yellowish hair. So those I left alone. If you enjoy this video, please subscribe. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers so that YouTube can take my channel seriously. And if you didn't enjoy it, subscribe anyway so that I could reach 1,000 and you can argue with me in the comments. Apparently, Some people find that very entertaining.